I'm Ellen Huckabee, Extension Agent in Alabama, and I would just like to welcome you all on behalf of the Alabama Extension System and say a special thank you to our partners in these monthly webinars, Texas A&M, Clemson, Alabama Extension, the University of Georgia, and those from E-Extension. Today's All Bugs Good and Bad webinar is on, the topic is TickSmart Living, and our speaker is Dr. Thomas Mather, also known as the Tick Guy, so he is the expert. Dr. Mather began his career at Rhode Island in 1992 from the Harvard School of Public Health, and he now serves as the director of the University of Rhode Island's Center for Vector-Borne Disease and its Tick Encounter Research Center. So, Dr. Mather, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, and welcome to everybody that's on this webinar. Hopefully, I'll keep you from itching too much as we go along. So, we're going to talk about TickSmart Living today, and I think it'll become very clear, at least my hope is that I'll make that clear as we go along. Let me just see if I can advance the slides. Here we go. So I'm wondering if anyone sees anything familiar in a picture like this. Usually when I show this, everyone's sort of says, oh yeah, I either live there or go there or walk my dog there, or ride my bike there, or something like that. But I'm wondering if you can see the ticks in this picture. Now, you remember ticks are small, so you have to look pretty carefully. Well, so there they are. I'll point out, so that's where they were right there. And these are 3 female black-legged ticks. And that wasn't all that we found in that setting. Here's a picture of what I got in about 10 feet in that same roadside one fall a few years ago. By the end of it, I had about 45 of those in 1 foot. And so when it says at the top of the slide, more ticks in more places, I was shocked. So if you can shock the tick guy about where ticks are and how many there are, it's something that you probably need to be aware of, at least. And there are, even in the Northeast, there's probably thousands and thousands and thousands of miles of roadside just like that. So it's not necessarily in a deep woodlands and you say, oh, well, I take comfort in the fact that I never go out in the woods. Well, that's not exactly going to protect you any longer when we see that there are indeed more ticks in more places. And more tick bites too, of course, that follows, right? When there's more ticks, there's likely to be more encounters with ticks and more tick bites. And you can just see some here. And probably most of the folks on the webinar today have experienced a tick bite, or maybe you're here because you don't want to experience a tick bite. And so, but you can see they're multivariate, where they occur, the types of ticks that bite, how long they end up biting for, and we'll talk a lot more about that as we go along. In this more ticks in more places country that we live in, maybe world even, it's sort of come at a bad time. It's kind of a perfect storm of more ticks in more places and the advent of the internet, where there's lots of information out there, some good, some bad, but it's really hard. It's really hard for people to discern what's the right thing. And so there's an awful lot of anecdote that has been supported. In so much that we may have sort of mostly low quality tick information, yet we are in a more ticks in more places world where more tick bites are happening. So in my way of thinking about it, it's a problem. That's a real problem. And what we're going to try and talk about today in a little bit more detail is sort of, okay, so whenever there's a problem, there's a need for a solution. But let's just look at the problem a little bit further. So in 2013, the CDC recast the way that they estimate numbers of cases of Lyme disease, which is just one of many tick-borne diseases that affect people in the United States these days. It used to be 30,000, and so by adding a zero to all of that, it is kind of an impressive jump. And I don't think it was that quick of a more ticks and more places change, but it was a readjustment of how cases are counted. And so that's a huge problem when you look at it. 300,000 cases, new cases of Lyme disease each year, surmounts most other infectious diseases, not all, but most in this country. And when you look at the next slide here, there was a householder survey done a few years ago, and it showed that almost 1 in 4 households in America reported at least one tick encounter during the past year. So this was maybe 2 years old now, but that's pretty impressive when you think about the more than 300 million people that live in this country, people that are encountering ticks in the face of perhaps misinformation or low quality information, at least information that's not necessarily directing them to the best things that they can be doing to prevent those tick bites. So it boils down to this: when you find that you live where ticks do, I think there's 2 things that can happen. You're either going to get tick bitten eventually, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but probably sometime. Or if you don't like that as an option, you could always get TickSmart. And that's really the message of today's webinar is, all right, so how does one get TickSmart? So you can go to training or webinars like this to try and learn some things about ticks and what you could be doing. But it really has to come a little bit further. It has to come to not just learning about it, but actually doing something about it. And so people that know me will probably get a little smile and chuckle that this guy's really kind of out there. But I have a dream. I have a dream that across America, we can develop a TickSmart group of citizens that will share this smarterness with other people, and we can sort of build on that so that we can overcome some of the issues that we face right now of knowing what to do and when to do it. So we can go from more ticks in more places world where people have their sort of preconceived notions. They think they know about this, maybe because of their experience with American dog ticks, but now they live where black-legged ticks are coming. And ticks are not just ticks. Different types of ticks do different things. They carry different germs. They have different life cycles. They can be attacked in different ways. And that's one of the things that people have to start to become more comfortable with if we're going to actually have them effectively change behaviors. So we go from a place where there's maybe a lot of anecdotal or misinformation, and in a TickSmart America, I believe we can have everybody saying, we're TickSmart, we do this, this, and this. And so we really have a long way to go in that regard. And it's not just up to the scientists in the crowd to develop new tools. We have plenty of great tools. It's about getting our citizens to adopt these tools and use them correctly. So this gets to a point that I think is really important, and that is, well, how does one persuade people to do this? And there's all kinds of behavior change models out there, but I think boiling it down in the most simple thing, for people to be able to affect change, there's really 4 things that they have to believe. They have to believe that they're susceptible and likely to fall victim to the disease or the tick bite, if you will. And so they have to feel that it could happen to them. If they don't feel it can happen to them, then they're really not gonna, any information that they take is gonna go in one ear and out the other. They also have to believe that disease will cause them significant adverse consequences. And I think that more and more people are starting to understand that tick-borne diseases are not anything to just shake a stick at for the most part. Back in the day when American dog ticks sort of were the main tick that people encountered, and the likelihood that they get a case of Rocky Mountain spotted fever was relatively rare. Ticks were just kind of a nuisance, but that's not really the situation these days, especially with black-legged ticks carrying multiple pathogens, Lone Star ticks spreading northward with also different pathogens than the black-legged ticks. And of course, we still have American dog ticks and out west wood ticks doing what they've always done so well, transmitting Rocky Mountain spotted fever germs and other germs too, probably. So people have to believe that the disease will cause them significant adverse consequences. They also have to believe that adopting preventive behavior is actually going to be effective for them. So it's like, people take the flu shot, but those people that are doing it half-heartedly, they're in this particular case, that doesn't cost them much to go and get a flu shot, especially when health insurance generally pays for it. But doing, tick bite preventive is a little bit more involved. And so in order for them to adopt this behavior, they have to believe it's going to be effective. And not just believe it, but I guess maybe in some cases, they need to have it proved to them that it's going to be effective. And finally, I think, and this is really, I think, a key, people have to believe that they can do it. If it's something that the mosquito control folks should be doing, spraying around neighborhoods or something, we don't have to get our hands dirty doing this. We don't have to do it. We'll just pay our taxes and it should be done for us. That's one thing. But this, I think TickSmart living is really going to be about, I can do that. So it has to be presented to them in a way that this is something that I can do. I see myself doing it. I can go to the store and buy that piece. I can implement it. And if they believe they can do it, then I think there's a greater likelihood that they will do it. So a lot of our TickSmart living programming is developed and is housed on this platform, our Tick Encounter resource page, and probably most of the folks here listening are at least somewhat familiar with this. And we've tried to make it relatively unique among websites to stand out, not just the high quality graphics, but the fact that it changes the message fairly frequently. Usually people say to me, Doc, just tell me what I need to know when I need to know it. And so that's the sort of what we've tried to do with Tick Encounter as well, is tell people what they need to know when they need to do it and when they need to know it. And so as part of the Tick Encounter programming, we've developed this concept of getting tick smart and being tick smart. And it's really about linking tick science with people's lived experiences. And I'd really like to focus on this people's lived experiences, because it's not just a bunch of scientists developing what they think is best. It's scientists translating their great knowledge. And we have a lot of great tick science that goes on in this country. But the translation is where it kind of gets a little bit on the weaker side. And I think we have to look at people's lived experiences. So as we develop, we can have TickSmart products that match people's lived experiences. We can have TickSmart services that, again, match people's lived experiences and their needs. And the whole goal would be to have TickSmart become part of a lifestyle. So for true adoption and effectiveness, I think it really has to be something that not only do you believe it works to help you from getting a tick-borne disease, you have to believe you can do it. And in fact, by doing that, it's got to be something that just becomes part of a lifestyle. And so we have 5 core actions. We thought more than 5. I mean, there's probably many more, but you could boil the 5 core actions into these categories, and that's probably more than people can remember. And usually after I present this, and I can't do all of them today, this information is all available on Tick Encounter. We'll focus on a couple. We try to just get people to commit to doing one of these things. If they could start by doing one, maybe the next time we ask them, they'll have done 2. And so it's all about becoming vigilant, just about making these behaviors sort of regular practices in their daily lifestyle. So I'm going to focus on the knowing the ticks that occur where you live and the seasons that they're active. I think that's really key. a lot of times people, I mean, we see this through this program we call Tick Spotters. It's become quite popular, and I'm going to describe a little bit about it. So if you don't know, we can help you know. So here's a bunch of pictures on the Tick Spotter page. You might be able to match up your picture, but as you'll see, people have a problem even with that. So if they have a problem with that, I suspect that they're going to have a problem adopting any more complicated science-based control strategy or whatever, unless someone holds their hand to get them to do it with them or does it for them. Anyway, so it all comes down to this. So here's somebody's lived experience. This poor woman, Liz, I use her as an example because it's so striking. She was a grandmother. She is a grandmother, and she found this. You could imagine she probably almost passed out when she saw this on her sweet little granddaughter's head, and probably felt like super guilty. She doesn't have to if she didn't see her 2 or 3 days ago, but you know, probably feels super guilty that she's responsible for the health of this poor little child. And so she reached out on Facebook, which lots of people do these days and probably doesn't help with the whole misinformation thing. There's a close-up of the same tick. And she wondered what it was. And so when she put it out on Facebook, her friends wanting to help joined back in. And I think this is really kind of interesting. So here's a friend that says you should bring it to the ER, the pediatrician. I don't know how many folks out there have had the same thought or experience, but my experience is that the pediatrician will be the last person I would take one of these ticks to. And I apologize if any of you are out there that are pediatricians at this point, but I was in a grand rounds once and the ER doc said, no, don't bring it to us. We don't want to be responsible for trying to figure out what it is. So here's a second friend, and she said it's not a deer tick. Pretty emphatic, so she's a type A person, I think. And she said if the redness does not spread, she should be okay. So a good friend trying to make her feel better, but you know, Liz found it hard to tell looking at all the pictures online. But Elaine here, she said it's too big to be a deer tick, and she doesn't like ticks anyway, so we don't know if we can believe her or not. And so Liz sent the picture off to us as well. But Paula, before we were able to see it, Paula said, no, ticks are almost microscopic. Deer ticks are almost microscopic. So she thinks this is an ordinary tick. So she's had some entomological training here, and ordinary ticks don't look like deer ticks, I guess. So anyway, not too long after that, we jumped in and we were able to tell her that this indeed was a female black-legged tick and that it had probably been attached for 2.5 days. And she might want to know that half of those ticks in the area that she came from were infected with Lyme disease and probably other germs as well. So she might want to take advantage of some tick testing resources and have the tick tested because it clearly had been attached long enough to transmit something if it was carrying it. To try and facilitate this, we've made a mobile-friendly device now, and you all might be interested in using this next time you encounter a tick as well, just to see if we actually do what we say we are going to do. So tickspotters.org would bring you to this page, and you just have to put in your email to start the process and fill out the form. I'm going to show you a little bit about this right now. So this is what I see once somebody has submitted it. And so we have information about whether they know what kind of tick it is, when it was encountered, what host it was encountered on, a person or a pet, and we have age now, we've changed that. And so we get a zip code as well and a state, and people can write a comment if they want to. And if they take a picture, so it doesn't help us if they don't send us a picture, because we, of course, have learned not to trust their ability to identify it. But here's the picture of that tick. And what we'll do, hopefully within 24 hours, although right now we're getting kind of slammed out there, and there's this just myself and my great graduate student, Heather, doing this. But we'll send back a message sort of confirming the ID, anything that we can say about the risk of disease. Here's a little bit more about risk. Suggests that in this case, probably the risk for disease would be relatively low because the tick hadn't really been attached for very long. Sometimes in this case, we see that the tick was damaged, so she might want to get a pointy tweezer rather than whatever she did use. But we give her sort of a next best suggestion about wearing tick repellent clothes, for instance, as well. So the email that you get back doesn't quite look like this. I prettied it up for the webinar, but it'd be nice if it looked like that, and we're working on trying to brand it that way. And so this is the kind of response we get. So here was a person that sent this tick in, and she replied, "Thank you so much for the great service." She's looking into options for sending the tick for testing because, of course, she's a little bit concerned about it. And she also is looking into whether she should be taking sort of prophylactic antibiotics while she waits to hear back. Here's another example of a tick. So this one came in December, 3.5-day fed female black-legged tick. And here's a woman that generally told us that she's very vigilant about tick checks in the spring, summer, and fall, but she's shocked that the ticks were out in the winter as well. So now she will adopt some of our TickSmart behaviors, some of her TickSmart behavior, but for the winter as well because it had happened to her. Here's one, never kiss this guy. He had this tick in a kind of an unusual spot. And again, he started following the steps on our website, and he said he hasn't had any new tick encounters. Thankfully, at least not there. So I think that this is very helpful, this sort of personalized approach to, it's very time consuming, and but it also allows us some insight and sort of a look into people's lived experiences with ticks. We see where they're coming from, we see a lot about it, we see that they're, whether they are in a position to maybe change some of their behaviors. Some of them will report that they are. And so I think this has really been quite eye-opening for me as a tick scientist, someone who's developed products and developed solutions in the past, seeing who my stakeholder base really is. And I think that's really what extension is all about. And I think probably all good extension folks try to get a little bit of insight into their stakeholders' sort of processes and behaviors. Sorry. Here was another one that was great. I just love the picture of these dogs. These are probably the most attractive dogs I've ever seen. And I'm not a dog person, but here's a guy who's smiling now because, as you can see, he started using a quick tick knockdown product rather than one that he used to use based on our recommendation. And he's only had 3 ticks instead of this. This is a one-day thing. He doesn't know, according to him, he doesn't know what to do with his free time. So if anybody needs a happy guy with 3 beautiful dogs, he has probably time on his hands. So the Tick Spotters has a lot of data. It would be nice if we could develop a dashboard like this to report on things. We haven't gotten to a point, we're so busy just collecting data that we haven't had a chance to figure out how to process it. We did back in 2014, but we haven't done much processing since then. But it's all possible to do. But what we've learned from some of this, for instance, we see that people just really don't recognize what type of tick. And if they don't recognize what type of tick, then they really don't have a good sense of what germs they might encounter and what diseases they might come down with. You can see that deer ticks, black-legged ticks seem to be the most recognized, but 58% of the time people misidentified them as well. Lone Star ticks, curiously, you would think, oh, that's pretty distinctive, but it turns out that it's the male. People encounter male Lone Star ticks more frequently than females, and no one really can recognize that. Maybe we get one in 1,000 people get it right when they have a male Lone Star tick. It's not very common. So this is something that we can get from a crowdsourced survey like this is, where can we direct education as well? And so we use this sometimes in our Facebook posts. So we can use tick spotter pictures. These are people's lived experiences, and some of them can be quite popular. Here's one that almost had 100,000 views, because it just probably struck home with folks that, oh, geez, that could be my kid, and I'm going to share that so that maybe we know to check on the back of the neck now underneath the hairline. We learned that people weren't very good about knowing that this tick and this tick are really the same tick. It's just in a different stage of engorgement. You could see that in the tick spotters work that we've done so far, that about a third of the ticks that we get have been engorged for more than a day and a half, which is quite long enough in most cases for them to start transmitting any germs they might be carrying. So that's kind of an eye-opener for folks too. I know when I'm out with deer hunters, for instance, in the fall, and up here the only tick really active is a black-legged tick adult, and they say, oh, doc, you're crazy. My deer had this kind of tick, and I had this kind of tick, and I had this kind of tick. And to have the reveal be that, oh, they're all the same ticks, just in a different stage of engorgement. I think another interesting thing was that almost 5% of the submissions aren't even ticks, but people think they are. And oftentimes the feedback we get is, oh, I'm so relieved that that wasn't a tick. I'm not sure I'd be that relieved if this is what I sent and I was told, oh, it just had bed bugs, even though they aren't likely to make you sick. But this is sort of, we call these things tick lookalikes, I guess, only because to somebody they look like a tick. I don't know to everybody, but the most common, actually, besides bed bugs, are these spider beetles, believe it or not. I actually have never seen one in my house, but I've seen hundreds of pictures of these now through tick spotters. So just be warned that ticks have 8 legs and no antennae, and other bugs have 6 legs and usually obvious antennae as well. So switching gears from the no category of core TickSmart actions, we'll go to just a few minutes on treating your yard. And so that could be TickSmart, but they're in tick management. This study pops out from the CDC, Allison Hinckley, and a really group of great scientists. And the test was, can one perimeter spray reduce people's risk of encountering ticks and maybe block disease? So here's what they did. They had a professional applicator spray one spray of around the perimeter of bifenthrin. And what they found in this study was that there were 63% fewer ticks in treated yards compared to untreated yards, but that there were really no significant reductions in human tick encounters and no measurable reduction in human disease as well, which kind of calls into question whether people should be spraying. Although when you look at the 63% fewer ticks, it's not that good. So we actually did a similar type of a study, but our treatments were a little bit different. So we did this in 77 backyards. The CDC study was a much larger one, and we got quite different results. So in our yards, we had professional applicators that were trained in TickSmart practices for applying pesticides, and they did 2 perimeter sprays with bifenthrin, and we got quite a bit different. So in treated yards, hardly any ticks compared to untreated neighborhood matched controls where there were quite a few ticks. So we had almost not quite 100% reduction in ticks compared to the CDC study with just 63. In this whole area of tick control, increasingly people want to use natural products. And when you find out that most people believe that natural products are meant to kill ticks but nothing else. And so clearly they need to first understand that if they're going to kill a tick, it's going to kill anything that might hit it. And so it may be, I don't know if safer is the right word, but yeah, it's not specific to ticks. Unfortunately, I think most people think that a natural tick-killing product is a is a tick killing only product. So that's something that we have to sort of get beyond. And we had a cooperative agreement with CDC to develop a screening method for these natural products, and we screened a bunch of products. So we had a highly replicated, we used this little arena type system with 60 nymphal stage ticks under field conditions, and then we had it replicated 6 times, and we measured both acute knockdown kill as well as residual kill on products. And here's just a summary, a real quick summary of some of the products. So Talstar was our positive control, that's the bifenthrin product. And all of these in the middle are various natural products, some of which aren't available any longer, unfortunately. In the case of this one and this one, that's no longer available, although you can get natural pyrethrum. And you could see it was reasonably effective. But some of these other products, this one was one that was also tested in Maine, for instance, with rosemary oils, but it was then reformulated into something called IC3 and a bunch of other formulations as well. And you can see that once they changed it, they didn't necessarily change it for the better, at least compared in our study. This is one that people, the CDC also had been developing this. It's sort of an Alaskan yellow cedar oil that also comes from grapefruit, and it's a food additive, quite expensive, not quite ready for prime time and tick control, seemed to be fairly effective. But the fact that it was from Alaskan yellow cedar, well, not everyone has Alaskan yellow cedar, but lots of people have red cedar oil, and these are very popular natural products marketed for tick control. You can see they didn't perform very well at all in our tests. So I guess the takeaway on this chart is that while it might be nice to think that you're using a minimal risk natural product, you have to decide whether you're willing to give up tick control for using a natural product. And I think that the real concern for me is that people, if they spray anything, they think they've done something, and it may not have done very much, and so they're still at risk. But they have this false sense of security. So we need to be guarded about that, and maybe use very effective products. In this particular case, we went to the backyards and we compared the bifenthrin with the rosemary oil product that had been changed. So not the initial one that was tested in Maine and by others, but with the changed one. And you can see that there was virtually no control in the backyard product, even though it's being applied widely in people's yards. And so we didn't apply it. The actual company that was spraying it on people's yards came and did it, and so they were duly shocked and unhappy with those results, as you would imagine that they would be. But it was nice that the screening lab results, the field study that I showed you briefly before, and field results in someone's backyards were consistent. So I think that maybe more work should be done promoting and testing products in a sort of a screening format. I'm now going to talk a little bit about turning tick clothes into tick repellent clothes. So the question is, I wonder how many people listening today could find this tick if it was on their body and below your belt. I mean, when was the last time you actually leaned over and looked? Some people, when I mention that, they probably are shocked at what's down there. And it's not easy to do anyway. So again, it's that getting to what people can do. And if they're going to prevent a nymphal stage black-legged tick bite or a Lone Star tick bite, a nymphal stage, they're going to have to lean over to look. And a lot of people don't know that. And so maybe a good strategy, a TickSmart strategy, would be to wear tick protection in your clothes. And so that everyone likes this idea, and then they reach for their favorite tick repellent, Deep Woods Off or something like that with DEET in it, and it doesn't work the same. But see, so that's the piece that is missing. We have to connect what works with people's practices, and I think that's really the challenge in developing sort of a more TickSmart America. Outdoor workers are especially at risk for ticks when they're working. And so we have a project right now sponsored by NIOSH, the National Institutes of Occupational Safety and Health. And we can think of tick repellent clothing as personal protective equipment for outdoor workers, keeps them on the job. And clearly these guys aren't going to tuck their pants into their socks like people read in every newspaper article about preventing tick-borne diseases. So why even tell people to do it, in a sense, if they're not going to do it? But instead, why don't we try and spend our energy getting them to wear tick repellent clothes treated with permethrin? And so we have a section on Tick Encounter about this, and you'll find it here. So this would be the home page, and then there's this series of boxes here. If you click on this one, it says, should I wear tick repellent clothes? And if you go to that site, you'll find this question answered, should I wear tick repellent clothes? So people generally want to know if it works, is it safe, and where can I get it, if they've been convinced of these two things. And so the is it safe piece, we developed using EPA data for absorption and transference of permethrin from clothing to skin. And we came up with an app that people can sort of do for themselves, so that you can enter sort of the weight of the subject. In this case, let's say it's a 10 or 11-year-old boy, and he wants to wear these clothes, some socks, a t-shirt, some shorts, and a ball cap. And if they were all treated appropriately with permethrin, then you could click on the calculate permethrin exposure, and you can see that he's got a margin of safety. And this number, it only means, I've adjusted it so it means this to me, that they would have to wear 2,186 of these outfits all at the same time just to reach the EPA's stated daily dermal no observable effect level. Now, I'm sure there would be an easier way to say this, and I've asked the EPA to think about, sort of recouching some of the language that they use so that people understand the difference between, say, hazard and risk. So hazard is something that we do in Petri dishes and test tubes that gives you an LD50, and risk really is determined by how much are you really exposed to. So you may not be exposed to anywhere close to what would come out as sort of a hazard statement. And I think that's really misleading for some people as well. But to me, no observable effect sounds pretty good to me. And there's no way I'm ever even going to get 20 pairs of socks on, much less 2,000. So I'm thinking that's good. And if it's treated commercially, it can go through the wash 70 times and still be effective. And so people are amazed. Oh, wow, that seems good. And so we've provided a link to a form that you can send this to. I have no commercial interest in the company Insect Shield, but they do this for retailers like LL Bean and REI and Ex Officio, and probably 40 or 50 other brand partners that have treated clothes out there, including the military. And you can watch this video to see how easy it is to do. Again, it's all about making something easy enough so that people feel confident that they could do that as well. And sometimes that hand-holding isn't very scalable because it seems like we're doing it one by one by one, but so our effort is to get more people that promote this type of activity so that people can get TickSmart and be tick safe. This slide's here just to remind me to tell people that we don't do this alone, and Tick Encounter is always happy to have people join them in this effort in terms of helping people get TickSmart. And so we have different levels of partnerships with people, and so an increasing number of folks have decided that they're happy to help share some of this material with their stakeholders. And it's just a way of spreading an effective product rather than all of the sort of anecdotal things that people think that might work or they hope might work or something like that. So in my TickSmart America that I'm thinking about, we have to develop a public health strategy, and that strategy needs to change people's knowledge. I think we've clearly found that changing knowledge is the first step, but can't be the last step, because that doesn't really bring on adoption. We have to change people's tick bite protection practices, which really speaks to adoption. And the goal would be to use education to empower people to do this. And in doing this, I think we can change people's lives for the better. And so I'm just going to leave you with three simple, these are some of the easiest things for people to say, okay, I'm ready to start, living a TickSmart life. Tell me what I should do, Doc. And so, here's one of the easiest things that you can do. You buy some permethrin spray for clothing only, and spray your shoes in May, June, July, and August. Now, why May, June, July, and August? Well, that's the time of year in most places that the ticks are in the nymphal stage or the larval stage, and they latch on at shoe level. And then if they latch on to permethrin-treated shoes, they will fall off and die. So that's a great time to do that. You could do that other times too, but at the very least, just do it those 4 months, and you'll find a great level of protection. Here's another one, just needs a mirror. Almost everyone has a mirror. Do a quick daily tick check. Here, focusing on when the adult ticks are active. So most adult ticks are going to latch onto people above the belt rather than below the belt. And so March, April, May, June, July, October, and November are months when adult stage ticks are active, whether they're dog ticks, deer ticks, Lone Star ticks, and almost all of them are going to end up above your belt. So just stand in front of the mirror and hold up your arms, look on the back of your arms, turn right, turn left. It takes, most people, when we ask them about doing a daily tick check, sometimes they just don't do it because they think it's going to take them half the night. Well, it doesn't have to take half the night. It can take 30 seconds, and that 30 seconds would be 30 seconds well spent on a daily basis. So it's just something that you build into your daily lifestyle. It's not that hard to do. Here's one that everyone sort of chuckles about, but actually one day I was sitting there realizing that it's getting harder and harder for me to look below my belt as I get older, and that if I just push it to the right and to the left a little bit while I'm sitting there, I can see actually quite a bit. Turns out that's where a lot of people find their ticks, and especially the nymphal stage ticks. And hopefully you're doing something like this once a day. And so just eat more fiber and do more tick checking, checking below the belt, especially when the ticks that are below the belt, nymphal stage ticks, April, May, June, and July. So I'm hoping that with these three things to get you started living a TickSmart lifestyle, that you'll already be feeling tick safer, and you're well on the way to helping us create a TickSmart America. And with that, I'm happy to stop and take questions.
Right. Does anybody have any questions today? You can type those either in the question and answer box, or you can type them right into the chat box.
Dr. Mather, while we're waiting, I'm the father of a 3-year-old, and just thinking about the kids. I heard you say something there about how quickly you remove a tick, and sort of what I gather, maybe is what I heard is there a correlation between how quickly a tick is removed and the possibility of infection or some disease being transferred?
So the empirical evidence says yes. So when you do experiments with animals, the quicker you remove an attached tick, the less likelihood it is to transmit an infectious dose of germs. We get a lot of challenges to this because there's anecdotal evidence out there. Oh, that tick couldn't have been attached that long. So one thing that we see is that people, when they send ticks into tick spotters and they tell us, oh, it couldn't have been attached that long, and I'm looking at this tick that clearly has been attached for 3 days, and I'm like, so I'm not really trusting people's judgment necessarily. And I'm sure there are people listening that will challenge me about this. It is true that everybody is different, so their immune status is different, so they may just be more susceptible. That particular tick may have had a larger dose of germs that it was carrying, but on average, the experimental studies show that people, at least animals don't get infected with, let's say, Lyme disease bacteria until the tick has been attached around a day or so. They may be transferring some pathogens, but they don't seem to infect the mice. Now, people and mice aren't the same, and maybe they're more susceptible. But for instance, I just the other day removed a tick from my neck. Unfortunately, it had been there. I knew exactly when I got it. I was out in the woods, and I didn't really check until just before I went to bed. So it'd been attached for 8 days, 8 hours. Sorry, not 8 days. Nothing has happened to me. So that whole thing, someone will say, "Oh, I got disease. It couldn't have been attached more than an hour." So I think that the rule of thumb would be remove the tick as quickly as possible, and the sooner that you remove it, the least likely there is for disease to occur.
Okay, great.
Hi, Dr. Mather. We have a question from Kathleen, and it is about using chickens as a control mechanism for ticks.
Okay, yeah, so I don't know where to go. If you pin in a small little 4x4 pin a chicken or a guinea fowl or something, they'll eat whatever is there. But if you think that free ranging, they're going to do a number on your ticks, I'll share with you it's a story that I always share, but I don't know how reliable it is, so you can take it or leave it. Many of you probably are familiar with the name Christy Brinkley. So when she was married to Billy Joel and they had this fine house out in East Hampton, she had her picture with her guinea fowl in Time magazine. And so I asked for permission to come and sample on their property. A study was done where they pinned guinea fowl in small little cages along the border of her yard, and found that in the pens where the guinea fowl were, there were no ticks, and in the pens where there were no guinea fowl, there were a few ticks. And so it seemed reasonable to guess that these birds could be tick predators in some way. And so this was way after that study was done. We went and I sampled all around the yard. It was a pretty wide open yard, pretty sunny, so not exactly conducive to deer ticks. What I noticed immediately was the guinea fowl tended to like to be out in the open area. Probably they're a little averse to shade because that's where predators are for them as well. So that, in a sense, they weren't going where the ticks might really be. But then I didn't find very many black-legged ticks there, partly because I think the habitat wasn't perfect deer tick habitat. But I found hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rabbit ticks, which are very common out on Long Island. And so I always sort of question whether guinea fowl are only selectively picking nymphal stage black-legged ticks and leaving the rabbit ticks because perhaps they taste bad. Now, you can decide for yourselves about that, but I'm thinking that, yeah, they'll probably chickens, guinea fowl, they might eat a tick here or there, but I don't think they're particularly efficient. And people swear by it, but then when you go and you look and you say, all right, well, where you're talking about is kind of out in the open where deer ticks aren't going to likely be anyway. So, yeah, that's just my gut feeling. I haven't done, a really intensive study of like a property that's terribly infested and has used chickens, and now they're no longer infested. So people probably have their own story about that, but I'll remind people that in the spring, there are a lot of ticks that people see. They're in the adult stage. In the summer, a lot of the ticks, the adult stage ticks aren't as active, or they're not there any longer. And the tick that is active are nymphs. And so people don't see them, and then they just think they don't have any ticks. So that's another concern.
Again, we have another question from Linda. What is the minimal amount of time before ticks start transmitting diseases?
Yeah, so that was what Mark asked. it depends on the germ. This new story that's out on the airways now about Powassan virus, studies have shown that it can be transmitted in a shorter period of time, and that's consistent with what we know about viruses. They can, if let's say the immature tick had picked it up and then it molted, and the virus, was protected from the molting process, but then in order to survive, the virus has to infect cells. It's not waiting for some external source of nutrient to grow like the Lyme disease bacteria would have to. So it would only the Lyme disease bacteria would start reproducing and spreading in the tick after the tick starts to take a new blood meal. The viruses could already be in the salivary glands and be transmitted more rapidly. So I think it really depends on the germ, how long it takes for an infectious dose to be transmitted.
And another is DEET, the common spray DEET. Is that effective?
So it says it repels ticks and mosquitoes. When you look at some of the information, even online, they're a little bit wavering on the whole tick thing. It's clearly a great repellent for biting flies. I think it's less effective against ticks. Technically, you're supposed to spray it on exposed skin, so not skin underneath clothes. And so if you're wearing long pants and shoes, where are you going to spray it? So some people spray it on their clothes. It doesn't work as effectively as permethrin does as a repellent on clothes. And so I just think that's one of the hardest nuts for people. They are so used to spraying that as a repellent, and they trust that it's equally as good. And so that's the concept that we're trying to get with TickSmart is you can do that, but it's not the most effective thing that you can do. And when you live in a more ticks and more places world, you need to commit to the most effective strategy.
And thank you. We've got a couple of more questions, but Mark, I wanted to ask you if you could put the couple of survey questions up right quick, so while we're finishing up, people would have a chance to answer those.
Yep.
And here's another one. If you could comment on the effect that warm winters have on tick populations.
Yeah, so that's a good one. I think most of these ticks have figured out how to get through cold weather. And so I'm not sure that warm is really worrying about dying, because ticks don't die in the winter. They just are less active. And so if we get a warm day, the ticks that were less active when it was cold become active. They weren't going to die anyway, really, but they just have a chance to become active now. So the warm winter, I don't think is the key. For most tick species, it's more about moisture and not drying out. And so a permissive setting, especially for black-legged ticks, is one where the close humidity that the tick environment is above 80%. So that's why they're really more likely to be in the shade than in the sun. But the temperature in the winter, all ticks will be inactive in freezing temperatures, but they're still there and they're not dead. We did a little study. We have a cute little video on YouTube that shows us burying ticks, when it was minus 5, and we came back out and dumped them into our hand, and within seconds they were walking because of the warmth of the hand. So they certainly weren't killed.
Great, thank you. And here is another one. Are there any good pet products that can be applied after being in tick habitat? Well, so
the best thing to do, the TickSmart thing, would be to use a product that is a quick tick knockdown product. So there's two types of products for your pets. One that sort of the tick has to bite first and then gets a dose. And then there's other products that are active before the tick bites. So those loose and wandering ticks. And I think that from my perspective, the TickSmartest product is one that kills ticks before they have a chance to bite. there's a lot of great products out there, and they all work. Well, they don't all work, but many of them work to kill ticks and help prevent disease in the pet. But the TickSmartest products are those that have quick tick knockdown, and will work even on loose and wandering ticks, because sometimes the tick on the dog doesn't bite, but then gets off the dog and gets on to people. And so if it's treated, and I wouldn't wait until you went out in the tick habitat. A good thing would be to keep your pets on tick preventers, pretty much, depending on where you live, but pretty much throughout the country, all 12 months of the year. I know sometimes people stop using it when they don't see as many ticks. Remember, you're not seeing as many ticks because they're in the nymph or larval stage, and it's harder to see those anyway. They're probably still there. If the adult ticks are there at one point of the season, you can bet that they got there because there were larvae and nymphs there as well.
Thank you, guys. We only have about 2 or 3 minutes left, so I will try to make these quick. When removing a tick, if you get blood on you, especially in a cut, are you more likely to be infected with a tick-transmitted disease?
It's a good question. We probably don't really know that, but it can't be a good idea. You can imagine if the tick was infected itself, if it had blood in you, it probably had already transmitted it sort of the normal way. So I don't know that you're going to get more sick if you had a cut as well. The best idea is to remove the tick safely with a pair of pointy tweezers. If your tweezer isn't pointy enough to pick up a poppy seed, you're probably not using an appropriate TickSmart tweezer. And we have information about that on our website as well. You don't really want to squish the tick necessarily, so that would try to hopefully avoid blood being there anyway. And clearly, that topical exposure, you could just use some topical antiseptic to try and reduce any transference of additional germs. Just kind of clean the whole mess up if you can.
Great, thanks. I think we have time for just one more. In the studies that you and/or the CDC did on bifenthrin perimeter sprays, was there a measurement of effects of non-target insects such as pollinators?
Yeah, that's a good question. Neither of us focused on the non-target impact. I know I can say, and this again, I'm completely anecdotal, but take it from someone who at least is trained entomologist. I have I've sprayed my yard for 25 years here as I've lived in Rhode Island, and I have more bees and bugs and lightning bugs and things, because the perimeter spray is really pretty limited. And in our TickSmart training of applicators, we do focus on the fact that you don't want to spray plants that pollinators might be using. So for instance, if there's clover in the lawn, just avoid spraying that when it's in flower. Certainly, if you're worrying mostly about black-legged ticks, which are going to be in the shade, it turns out most honeybees don't really pollinate those flowers anyway that are in the shade. Their mouth parts are not suited for that. But the whole idea is to not spray the flowers, and that can certainly go a long way to protecting pollinators from the impact of some of these sprays.
Thank you. And Mark, do we have a few more minutes, or are we out of time? I'm trying to.
I'm good. If Dr. Mathers is okay and everyone else is, we can hang around for another few minutes and take more questions.
Okay. Here's one. Then I'll take a couple more. How effective compared to other types of insecticides is the commercially treated permethrin clothing? Well, how much more effective is the commercial treated permethrin clothing compared to over-the-counter that we would do ourselves?
Yeah, so the do-it-yourself works pretty similarly initially. So we did a study, and it's available on that site that I targeted, the sort of does it work, we had self-treatment, commercial treatment, and no treatment in our summer weight clothes in that study. And without any laundering, both commercial treatment and self-treatment were equally as effective. With the difference comes with the long-lasting activity. So self-treatment can last through maybe 4 or 5 washes, and commercial treatment can last through 70 washes. So it's that's where the difference really is.
Thank you. I'm trying to see, does anyone have, go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you, Danny, for handling those questions, and thank you, Dr. Mather. We really appreciate everybody's attendance today, and hope you will join us in June for the next webinar, which will be aphids, scales, and whiteflies.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks, folks. Bye-bye.